Chapter 1: The Wild Wolf. They call me the Wild Wolf. I didn't choose the name. Soldiers did, after watching me drag a broken platoon through mud, blood, and a blizzard to gut an entire rebel camp. They cheer when they say it. Generals spit when they do. Both reactions please me. The war at the border isn't fought with honor or banners. It's fought with traps, smoke, and desperation. I learned long ago that victory smells nothing like glory. It smells like sweat, burnt gunpowder, and fear. This morning, I stood on the ridge above the valley where our enemies camped, watching the first glint of sunlight hit their armor. My scouts had already sabotaged their supply wagons and salted the meat inside. By noon, they'd be starving and furious. By night, we'd strike. A soldier approached, panting. "Commander Kale, message from the capital. The Crown Prince rides here with his escort." I didn't even look at him. "Tell him the border smells like piss and smoke. If he wants a parade, he came to the wrong end of the empire." He flinched, hesitated, then ran off. I spat the taste of iron from my mouth and laughed to myself. The Crown Prince, Lucien Valenhart, the Empire's perfect alpha, all polished armor and cold precision. I'd heard rumors that he ran his palace like a battlefield, that he hated chaos, and that he never smiled. I wondered what he'd do when he met chaos wrapped in flesh. By the time he arrived, the sun had drowned behind the mountains. His escort's banners cut through the smoke like a knife. My men straightened, uneasy. Even the drunk ones sobered up. Lucien dismounted without a word. Not a speck of dust on him. His armor gleamed, his scent sharp and cold like frost over steel. Everything about him screamed control. I stepped forward. "Welcome to the edge of the Empire, Your Highness." His gaze slid over me, assessing, calculating. "Commander Kale, I presume." "The one and only," I said, bowing just enough to mock the gesture. "We just finished wiping out a rebel garrison. Sorry you missed the fireworks." He frowned slightly. "Your report claimed heavy losses on both sides." I shrugged. "A victory's still a victory. Paperwork doesn't bleed, Your Highness." He didn't smile. "You're reckless. Your methods border on insubordination." "Borders are my specialty." Something flickered in his eyes then. Irritation, maybe curiosity. Hard to tell. He turned away before I could read it fully. The night stretched on. He insisted on inspecting every weapon, every supply line, every soldier. I watched him move. Precise, flawless, untouched by dirt or fatigue. He was the kind of man who could walk through chaos and somehow stay immaculate. When he reached the campfire where my captain sat drinking, he paused. "Your troops lack discipline," he said. "They're alive. That's all the discipline war demands." I replied, "You mistake survival for strength. And you mistake control for power." That was the first time our gazes locked. The air thickened, sharp as a drawn blade. Neither of us looked away. He spoke first, voice low. "You're a wolf that should have been tamed long ago." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Maybe you should have brought a leash, Your Highness." Something dark flashed in his eyes. He turned sharply. "We begin the inspection at dawn. Don't be late." When he walked away, I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The scent he left behind clung to the air. Clean, cutting, and infuriatingly alpha. That night I couldn't sleep. My tent felt too small, my heartbeat too loud. I told myself it was just the suppressants kicking in. They always made my chest feel tight, my skin too hot. I took another dose anyway, swallowing the bitterness. No one could ever know. Not my soul. Chapter 2: Fractures. The headaches started 3 days after the prince arrived. At first, I blamed the mountain air. Then the heat. Then his voice. But when my vision blurred mid-briefing, I knew what it really was. The suppressants were wearing thin. Every breath burned down my throat. My pulse skipped. The scent blockers that had kept me safe for years were losing their edge. My body was turning against me. I doubled my dosage and kept moving. Commander doesn't get sick. A wolf doesn't bleed where the pack can see. Lucien noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You look pale." he said one afternoon as we reviewed troop rotations. I look better than you, I muttered. His eyes flicked up. He didn't answer, but the way he stared at me, steady, unnerving, made the room feel too small. I turned away before he could smell the sweat beading under my collar. By nightfall, the sky split open with thunder. My soldiers were restless. Something in the air felt wrong, a heaviness before the storm that didn't come from the weather. I was halfway through a patrol when the first explosion hit. The rebels struck from the forest's edge, torches flaring like red eyes in the dark. Positions! I shouted, voice tearing through the chaos. Steel clashed. Arrows screamed past. My head swam. The suppressants, gods, they were failing. I could feel the heat under my skin, the ache spreading low in my stomach. Not now. Not here. Commander! A soldier yelled, dragging me aside as a blast threw dirt and smoke into the air. Couldn't breathe. My chest locked. My body screamed for something I'd buried for years. Then his scent. Lucien. He cut through the smoke like a blade, armor streaked with mud, eyes bright with fury. Kale. I'm fine. I tried to snarl, but the words came out cracked. The world tilted. My knees hit the ground. He caught me before I fell, hands gripping my shoulders. You're burning up. Don't. I choked, shoving him back. Too late. The heat surged, drowning reason. The moment our skin met, the air changed. My scent, the one I'd hidden all my life, broke free, rich and wild and unmistakably Omega. I heard it before I felt it. The silence. Soldiers freezing. The prince's sharp inhale. Then chaos. Commander Kale. An Omega? It's impossible. Lucien's eyes widened, shock flickering into something darker. Instinct. His alpha scent roared to life, fierce and commanding. Every nerve in me screamed to run, but my body betrayed me, trembling under the weight of it. Get back. All of you out, he barked at the soldiers. They obeyed. I didn't move, couldn't. The suppressant haze blurred my mind. I felt fevered, raw, half-mad. Lucien, I hissed, though the word came out like a plea. He stepped closer, too close. His breath ghosted against my throat. You should have told me. Would you have let me live? His jaw tightened. It's my decision to make. Something inside me snapped. Pride, restraint, maybe everything at once. Then stop looking at me like that. But he didn't. His hand rose, trembling, and the heat between us cracked wide open. It wasn't gentle, it was collision, instinct, desperation. His lips on my neck, the mark searing through skin and soul before either of us could think. Pain, pleasure, fury, everything blurred. The world dissolved into the sound of my pulse and his breath breaking against mine. And then darkness. When I woke, the air was cold. My body ached in ways I didn't want to understand. The tent was quiet except for the low crackle of a dying fire. Lucien sat beside me, armor off, head in his hands. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then I felt the bond humming faintly under my skin. Real. Irrevocable. I forced my voice steady. Congratulations, Your Highness. You just turned your best commander into property. He flinched. Kale. Don't say it was an accident. Don't pretend it meant something. I stood, ignoring the way my legs trembled. His eyes lifted, raw with something dangerously close to guilt. You think I wanted to. I think you don't even know what you want. Silence fell, sharp and final. The mark burned beneath my collarbone, a brand that would never fade. By imperial law, I was now his Omega, bound to the crown prince, to the man who had called me wild and then chained me in one breath. I turned to leave. You'll regret this, he said quietly. I looked back once, just long enough to smile without warmth. No, Lucien. You will. Chapter 3, The Cage of Honor. By the time we returned to the capital, the rumors had already beaten us there. The story spread faster than fire in dry grass. The mighty wild wolf of the border, the Empire's indomitable alpha commander, was no alpha at all. He was an Omega, marked by the crown prince himself. They said it with laughter, with disgust, with fascination. Some whispered I'd seduced Lucien for power. Others claimed he'd forced me to the ground like a beast. Both versions were lies. The truth was worse, we'd both lost control. The palace gates loomed high, black marble gleaming like judgment. I rode in beside Lucien, every stare like a blade to the throat. He kept his head high, expression unreadable. I didn't bother hiding my smirk. If they wanted a spectacle, I'd give them one. Inside, the council awaited. Rows of alphas in polished armor, their scent thick with dominance. The air itself seemed to sneer. Commander Kale, or should we say, Omega Kale? One of them said, his voice oily with false respect. The laughter that followed was polite, poisonous. I tilted my head. Whichever title makes you feel smaller, counselor. Lucien's jaw tensed beside me, but he said nothing. Another councilman leaned forward. It is inappropriate for an Omega to command imperial legions. It sets a dangerous precedent. Dangerous, because I win wars? I repeated softly. The man flushed. Because it defies the natural order. I met his gaze and smiled without warmth. Then maybe your natural order needs defying. The chamber buzzed with shock. Lucien finally spoke, voice cold and sharp. Enough. His word cut through the noise. For a heartbeat, everyone fell silent. Lucien turned to me. Kale, the council has concerns. Until the matter is resolved, you'll remain under my supervision. My blood went cold. Supervision. He hesitated. You'll stay within the palace grounds. Temporarily. So that was it. A gilded cage dressed up as protection. I laughed short, bitter. You're locking me up to make them feel safe. His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of guilt. It's for your own safety. The nobles. This isn't about safety. It's about shame. I snapped. He stepped closer. Kale. Don't, you can order me, your highness. You can even leash me. But don't pretend you're doing me a favor. He flinched like I'd struck him. When the council dispersed, I was left standing alone in a room full of ghosts, the scent of dominance and disgust still clinging to the air. That night, I stood on the balcony of the chamber they'd assigned me. Spacious, luxurious, lifeless. The city sprawled below, indifferent. Somewhere out there, soldiers who once followed me without question now whispered behind my back. An Omega commander. A marked one, no less. A knock at the door. Lucien entered without waiting. Still in uniform, every line of him carved in restraint. You should rest, he said quietly. I should be at the border, I replied. He sighed. The council will not allow it. They can't fight without me. They'll have to learn. I turned on him. You think I can just sit here while men die? While my name becomes a joke? His voice rose, sharp. You think this is easy for me? They question my control, my judgment. I cut him off. Good. Let them choke on it. You wanted a perfect empire, Lucien? Perfection doesn't bleed. People do. Silence stretched. His gaze softened, briefly. You think I don't regret what happened? I laughed. Regret isn't enough. He stepped closer again, too close. You said I'd regret keeping a wolf on a leash. And you will, I said, meeting his eyes. Because wolves don't forget who tied the chain. He didn't move. Neither did I. The space between us pulsed, not desire, not yet. Just tension, raw and unbearable. Finally, he turned away. You'll remain here until further notice. Fine, but if you plan to keep me caged, at least have the decency to admit it, I said. He paused at the door. It's not a cage, Kale. Then why does it feel like one? He left without answering. Days passed. The palace glittered with polished hypocrisy. Courtiers bowed and smiled. But the moment I turned my back, their whispers crawled after me. Some soldiers averted their eyes. Others smirked. None saluted. When I finally returned to the training grounds, with Lucien's reluctant permission, the silence that greeted me was worse than insult. They looked at me like a relic, a curiosity. Resume drills, I ordered. No one moved. A captain, young, broad-shouldered, sent sharp with alpha arrogance, stepped forward. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted," I said. He smiled thinly. "You're not my sir anymore." The laughter that followed was the sound of chains breaking. "There's not mine." I walked up to him until my boots brushed his. "You think being alpha makes you stronger? Try proving it," I said softly. He swung. I caught his fist midair and twisted. The snap of his wrist echoed across the yard. "Lesson 1, power doesn't care what you were born as," I said, dropping him to the dirt. I turned to the rest. "Anyone else want to test theory against experience?" No one spoke. Lucien was watching from the edge of the yard. I'd known from the moment I stepped out. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides. When I passed him, he said quietly, "You're making this harder." "Good. Maybe hard things are the only ones worth doing." That night, the palace felt colder than ever. I stared at my reflection in the dark window. The mark still faint on my neck, a reminder and a curse. I'd won battles, commanded armies, defied death. But now the enemy wore silk and whispered my name like a scandal. And the man who'd once called me a wolf now held the key to my cage. Chapter 4, Blood and Brothers. They say betrayal never comes from an enemy. They're right. It comes from someone whose laughter you once trusted, whose hand you've pulled out of the mud, whose life you've saved more times than you can count. Someone like Aaron. The beta I'd raised like a brother. The rebellion spread faster than command could contain it. Towns fell overnight. Reports blurred into smoke and blood. Every courier brought bad news. Every dispatch screamed retreat. Lucien ordered me back to the front. "You know the terrain better than anyone," he said. "Or maybe you just need someone else to blame when this goes to hell," I muttered. He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. I took that as agreement. My unit, what was left of the old Border Legion, moved under moonlight. We were outnumbered but not outsmarted. That had always been my edge. Aaron rode beside me, quiet, too quiet. "You haven't said a word in 2 days. Losing your tongue or your nerve?" I said. He gave a thin smile. "Just thinking, sir." "That's dangerous." "I suppose it is." Something in his tone unsettled me, but I pushed it aside. We had a war to win, and paranoia didn't suit commanders. The ambush came at dawn. Smoke grenades first, then the whistle of arrows. My men fell before I even gave the order to scatter. "Positions!" I roared, drawing my blade. The forest erupted in chaos shouts. Fire. Steel. I caught a glimpse of movement to my left. Aaron, sprinting toward the ridge. I thought he was rallying the flank. Then I saw the flare in his hand, the wrong color, the rebel's signal. My stomach turned to ice. "Aaron!" He hesitated, just long enough for guilt to flicker in his eyes. Then he fired the flare skyward. The enemy poured down from the hills like a tide. I fought until my sword cracked, until my arms shook and my lungs burned. But the trap had been perfect, his trap. When I finally cornered Aaron amid the smoke, his uniform was half torn, his face streaked with ash. "Why?" I demanded. He didn't flinch. "Because you're not supposed to be here, Kale. Not supposed to." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're saying that while holding a rebel blade?" He met my gaze, eyes glassy but resolute. "You being here, an omega marked by the crown prince, it poisons everything. Soldiers whisper. Nobles hesitate. The chain of command is breaking because of you. You think the chain was ever pure? I think the empire will burn if people forget who's meant to lead." He lunged. I parried, but the movement sent fire up my injured arm. "You'd kill me for your idea of purity?" His blade trembled against mine. "For the empire," he whispered. That was the moment something inside me fractured. Not my faith, not my pride. Just the last piece of innocence I'd kept for him. I disarmed him with a twist and knocked him to the ground. "You were my brother," I said. He looked up, tears mixing with dirt. "I still am. That's why I had to do it before someone else did." Before I could answer, cannon fire tore through the ridge. The capital's banners glimmered in the distance. Lucien's forces, caught in the ambush Aaron had orchestrated. I didn't think. I ran. The siege lasted hours. Smoke blotted out the sun. I found Lucien amid the chaos, his armor dented, his guards dead or dying. "Fall back," I shouted. He turned, eyes wide when he saw me. "Kale? You're—" "No time." I shoved him aside as a shell hit the barricade. The blast threw us both into the dirt. My ears rang. My vision blurred. I felt blood on my face that wasn't mine. Lucien coughed, reaching for me. "We're surrounded. Then we make a hole." I fought like I was burning alive. Steel met bone, smoke met breath, and somewhere in the chaos, I forgot what side I was supposed to be on, empire, rebellion, it all bled the same color. When we finally broke through, the square was half in ruins. I dragged Lucien behind the shattered walls of the old watchtower. He looked at me, dazed. "You saved me. Don't sound so surprised." He opened his mouth, then stopped. Behind him, Imperial soldiers were approaching, weapons raised. Their commander barked, "Drop your blade, Kale." I froze. Lucien frowned. "Stand down." The commander cut him off. "We have orders. Commander Kale is under arrest for treason." "What? Who gave that order?" Lucien snapped. "Aron Varlin, by His Majesty. The King's order, Your Highness." My stomach dropped. They brought the papers, sealed, signed with King's own crest. Aron's handiwork. But the proof was there in ink. Lucien looked at me. Confusion, doubt, pain all flickering in his eyes. "Kale." I shook my head. "You know I didn't. Tell me you didn't. I just saved your damn life." He took a step closer, but his soldiers raised their weapons. I laughed, hollow. "You don't believe me." He didn't answer. For a moment, everything went still. The smoke, the screams, the ruin around us. I saw Aron watching from the ridge, his expression unreadable. And I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was execution by proxy. Lucien's voice came quiet, almost strangled. "If what they say is true, if it were, you'd already be dead." Cut in. Silence. Then softly, "Take him." They seized me. My knees hit the mud. Lucien didn't look away. But he didn't stop them either. The man who'd once called me his equal now stared like I was something he didn't recognize. As they dragged me past him, I forced a smile. Cracked, bloody. "You're learning, Your Highness. Never trust anyone until you've destroyed them first." He flinched but said nothing. That night, as the chains bit into my wrists and the cell door slammed shut, I stared at the wall until my vision blurred. The sound of the siege still echoed in my head. Aron's voice, Lucien's silence, the roar of a world tearing itself apart. Maybe this was how wolves died, not in battle but betrayed by their own pack. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark, "If this is honor, I want none of it." Chapter 5: Chains and Silence. They locked me in a cell made of iron and silence. No trial, no ceremony, just the clang of the gate and the echo of boots walking away. The air smelled of rust and wet stone. My wrists were raw from the chains. The mark on my neck throbbed like a wound that refused to heal. Every breath felt heavier than the last. I'd fought 100 battles and bled on 10 different fields, but nothing ever felt as suffocating as waiting for a man's doubt to decide your worth. Lucien hadn't come for 3 days. I thought maybe that was mercy. Nights were worse. The silence pressed against my skull, and my mind wandered to places I didn't want it to go. The sound of Aron's voice sang for the Empire, the look in Lucien's eyes when he said take him. On the 4th night, footsteps stopped outside my door. 2 guards. Then his voice. "Leave us." The locks turned. Lucien stepped inside, the torchlight catching on his armor. He looked the same and not at all. Cleaner than I remembered, but his eyes. They were tired. "Your Highness, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Come to watch the traitor rot," I said dryly. He didn't answer, just stood there watching me. I leaned back against the wall. "Don't tell me you finally realized the reports were forged." "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said quietly. That stung more than I wanted to admit. "Then you believe the wrong people. Again." "Kale. Don't. You made your choice. You always do." I cut him off. He exhaled, slow and sharp. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to chain the only man who ever... Say it. Finish that sentence. I snapped. He didn't. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. I stood, the chains clinking against the stone. You could have asked me. You could have trusted me. His voice rose. I trusted you with my life, not with your heart. He froze, and for the first time since I'd known him, the crown prince looked lost. I took a step closer, the limit of my chains clinking between us. You'll never trust anyone until you lose something irreplaceable. His gaze dropped to the mark at my neck. The air changed, heavy, dangerous. And what if I already have? I should have pushed him away when he closed the distance. Should have turned my face aside when his hand caught my jaw. But I didn't. The kiss hit like a storm. Nothing tender, all teeth and hunger. I bit back, equal parts rage and need. He tasted of guilt and desperation, of something we'd both been pretending not to want. When he broke away, his breath was ragged. I can't undo this, he whispered. No, but you can live with it. That's your punishment, I said, voice low. His hand lingered at my throat, the bond pulsing faintly between us. For a heartbeat, we were just two men caught in the ruins of everything we'd built. Then the alarms began to sound. The walls shook. Somewhere above, an explosion ripped through the east wing. Shouts echoed down the corridor. Rebels! The palace is under attack. Lucien turned toward the noise. Stay here. I laughed. You still think you can give me orders? He hesitated. Kale, go. Be the prince they want. He left, and the moment he did, I twisted my wrist and slipped the pin I'd hidden in my sleeve into the lock. 1 click. 2. The chains fell. The guards outside were already gone, or dead. I ran through smoke and shadow, every instinct screaming to flee. Freedom waited just beyond the outer gate. But the mark on my neck burned. Lucien. Damn it. I turned back. The corridors were chaos. Fire, debris, screams. Rebels in scavenged armor clashed with Imperial guards. I cut through them like a blade through mist, half by instinct, half by fury. When I found him, he was pinned beneath a fallen beam, sword out of reach, blood streaking down his temple. A rebel stood over him, raising his blade. I didn't think. I threw mine. It struck clean through the man's throat. Lucien gasped as I hauled the beam off him. You came back, he said hoarsely. I smirked. Don't flatter yourself. He tried to stand, stumbled, and I caught him. You should have run, he muttered. And missed the chance to save your royal ass again? Not my style. We moved together through the burning halls, smoke choking the air. When we reached the courtyard, the last of the rebels had fled. The palace guards closed the gates behind us. Lucien sank to his knees, coughing. I stood over him, chest heaving. He looked up, eyes dark. You're still under arrest. I laughed. Of course I am. But he didn't move to chain me. He just stared, like he was trying to memorize the shape of my face before the world tore it away again. Kale, why do you keep saving me? He said softly. I met his gaze, tired and sharp. Because I'm not a fucking traitor. Then I turned and walked into the smoke, before he could stop me. Before I could start to care again. The final battle was a blur. Heat, smoke, blood. My leg gave out halfway through, but I kept moving. Every swing of my sword was slower than the last. Every breath came with the taste of copper. At some point, a spear caught me between the ribs. I didn't feel it until I tried to shout another order and blood filled my mouth instead. I dropped to one knee. The world tilted. Lucien's voice cut through the chaos. Kale! He was fighting his way toward me, cutting through rebels like a man possessed. His guards shouted for him to fall back, but he ignored them. I wanted to tell him to stop, to save himself, but the words wouldn't come. He reached me just as another blast shook the wall. Dust rained down. I slumped against the broken stones, laughing weakly. Still giving orders? I rasped. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking. Don't you dare. Relax, Your Highness. You'll make it. I don't care about that. You should. I coughed, blood staining his armor. Because the world still needs fixing, and you're the only fool stubborn enough to try. He pressed his forehead to mine, breath ragged. I was wrong about everything. About you. He whispered. I smiled faintly. Took you long enough. His hand trembled at my throat, over the bond that still pulsed weakly. Stay with me. I can't. You can. No, you'll build something better, Lucian. That's how you make this worth it. I said softly. He shook his head, tears slipping through the grime on his face. My vision was fading, the battlefield blurring into gray. I tried to lift my hand, to touch him, but it fell halfway. If only I'd been born an alpha, I whispered. But the light dimmed, and the last thing I felt was the warmth of his hand on mine, and the faint echo of his scent as the world went quiet. They told stories later, I'm sure. How the wild wolf died defending the gate. How the crown prince survived by his courage. But I know the truth. I didn't die for the empire. I died for the man who chained me. Chapter 6, the second beginning. Fire, breath, pain. I woke to the scent of smoke and skin. My throat burned. My pulse thrummed beneath a mark that shouldn't exist anymore. Lucian's face was above me. Younger, less scarred, eyes wide with the same shock I'd once mistaken for hatred. I knew this scene. The tent, the night after the ambush, the fever in the air. The moment everything began to unravel. The moment he marked me. No, this was impossible. I had died. I remembered the sphere through my ribs, the smoke. I remembered dying. And yet here I was, alive, the mark still fresh, Lucian's scent thick in the air like a storm that refused to pass. He said something, my name, maybe, but I couldn't hear him. My heart was hammering too loud. The universe had looped back on itself, trapping me in the same cursed moment. I sat up too fast, the pain in my neck flaring. The tent spun. Lucian reached for me. Kale, stop. Don't touch me. I snapped, jerking away. He froze, hands still halfway between us. For a long moment, all I could do was stare at him. At the man who would one day be my captor, my salvation, my ruin. And he didn't even know it yet. You should rest, he said carefully. I'm fine. I wasn't. Every nerve screamed. The scent of his alpha pheromones was suffocating. He looked confused, but I was already moving. I needed air, space, sanity. Outside, the camp stretched beneath a pale dawn. Soldiers moved like ghosts through the mist, repairing walls, tending to the wounded. Everything looked the same, and it was the same. The night before the chain began. And this time I knew where it led. When I reached my tent, I stared at my reflection in a dented mirror. The same eyes. The same scar along my jaw. The same lie written into my body. An omega pretending to be an alpha. A soldier pretending not to care. But this time I wasn't pretending for anyone. The gods, fate, whatever cruel hand ran this world, had given me another chance. Not to rewrite the past, maybe, but to escape it. I couldn't stop what would come. Lucian's coronation. The betrayal. The fall. The gate. My death. But I could choose not to be there when it happened. That night, I packed quietly. Only what I could carry. My dagger, a canteen, a stack of sealed documents I'd hidden months ago. Records of the empire's corruption, the general's blood deals, the nobles' slave routes. If I was going to disappear, I might as well leave something burning behind me. When the moon rose, I slipped through the shadows, past the sentries who still saluted me without knowing they were seeing a ghost. The horses stamped softly in their pens. I chose the smallest one, fast, quiet, black as smoke. I looked back once. Lucian's tent stood in the center of camp, his banner gleaming faintly in the moonlight. He was probably asleep, or awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why his wolf refused to be tamed. I almost laughed. Goodbye, Your Highness. This time, I won't be your tragedy. I whispered. By morning, the fire was already spreading. I'd left enough oil to make it look convincing. A collapsed tent, charred armor, my insignia half melted in the ashes. The soldiers would assume I'd been caught in a supply explosion. By noon, word would reach Lucian. General Kale, the wild wolf, dead in the night. The perfect ending for a man who never existed. I rode north through the forests until the roads vanished. My suppressants were nearly gone, and my body was still weak, but the wind was clean, the sky open. For the first time in years, I wasn't anyone's weapon. I wasn't an alpha or an omega. I was just alive. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing in that tent, reaching for me, the confusion in his eyes when I pushed him away. He didn't know yet what he'd become, what we'd become, but I did. And maybe that's why I didn't hate him anymore. I set up camp deep in the woods that night. No uniform, no insignia, just a fire and a heartbeat. I burned my old banner, the wolf emblem, and watched it curl into ash. When the flames died, I whispered to the dark, "Let him think I'm dead. Let him mourn. It's the only mercy I can give him." The mark on my neck pulsed once, faintly. A ghost of connection I thought death had erased. It would fade eventually. Everything did. I lay back on the cold ground, staring up at the stars, and for the first time since waking, I allowed myself to breathe. The world was still cruel, still broken, but I wasn't chained to it anymore. Tomorrow I'd ride west, change my name. The wild wolf would die again, not by blade but by choice. And somewhere in the capital, Lucien would wake to ashes and think, for the rest of his life, that he'd lost me once and for all. If only he knew. Chapter 7, The Shadow Strategist. Years teach you how to disappear, not just from sight but from memory, from history. The man once called General Kale, the wild wolf of the border, died in a campfire explosion 7 winters ago. The Empire held a funeral. I heard they built a monument. Lucien himself ordered the soldiers to salute the ashes. If only they knew I was alive. And laughing. Now I'm no one. Or, rather, I'm someone else. The name they whisper in taverns and rebel bunkers is the Black Wolf. No rank. No face. Just words and strategies written in invisible ink. Started small. A letter smuggled through the southern forests. A suggestion to an insurgent captain on how to ambush a convoy. Then another, coded routes for refugees, fake seals for Omega's fleeing conscription. Soon, people began to trust the handwriting. And trust is power. I live above a workshop in a mining town near the western border, where no one asks questions as long as you pay on time and keep your scent masked. The air reeks of coal and oil, the sky always bruised with smoke. It suits me, my current disguise. A quiet beta scholar with a limp and bad manners. It's amazing what people don't see when they believe you're beneath notice. My neighbor, Old Mara, calls me Document. She runs a bakery downstairs and feeds every stray that wanders in, including me. "You look like hell again," she says each morning, handing me bread that smells like warmth. "I've been worse," I tell her. She laughs, not knowing how true that is. At night, when the city sleeps, I write. My workspace is cluttered with maps, cipher keys, and stolen imperial reports. The letters go out through couriers who never see my face. Rebels, smugglers, even sympathetic soldiers. Each message ends the same way. Run fast. Fight harder. Black Wolf. Freedom isn't peace. It's quieter, that's all. I see the Empire's rot spreading even from here. Omegas drafted as breeders. Alphas growing fat off their labor. The same old story written in fresh blood. Some nights, I think about burning it all down. Then I remember, I already tried that once. So now I cut slower, smarter. Every noble's downfall begins with a single wrong order, a single shipment redirected. And I'm very good at those. It was during one of those long nights that a courier brought me news that stopped my pen midstroke. "The coronation, Lucien has taken the throne," he said. I froze. Lucien, Emperor. I dismissed the courier and locked the door, staring at the flickering candlelight. The mark on my neck, faint now, almost gone, seemed to pulse, as if the bond itself had heard the news. Of course he'd made it. He always did. The Empire could burn around him, and he'd still stand tall, immaculate, untouchable. I poured myself a drink, the cheap kind that burns twice, once going down, once when you remember why you're drinking it. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," You finally got your empire. I muttered to the empty room. But I knew him too well. He'd rule efficiently, perfectly. He'd crush rebellion with precision. And yet, at night, he'd still wake sweating, reaching for a ghost that wasn't there. I wondered if he ever dreamed of the marking, that brutal, fevered moment that chained us both. I wondered if he hated himself for it. I hoped he did, not out of cruelty, but because if he still felt guilt, it meant there was something human left in him. Weeks turned into months. My letters reached farther, across borders, through outposts, into the heart of the resistance. The name Black Wolf became something between a rallying cry and a superstition. Follow the wolf's orders, and you live. Disobey, and you vanish. I didn't correct them. My legend was safer than my truth. But there were nights when I'd catch my reflection in the window. The scar at my throat, the faint curve of the old mark, and I'd remember what I'd been. I'd remember Lucien's hand trembling on my armor, his voice breaking as he said stay. And I'd wonder what he would do if he knew his dead general was orchestrating the rebellion that threatened his crown. Would he rage? Would he mourn? Would he finally understand what freedom meant? One night, while reviewing reports from the northern provinces, I found a sealed imperial decree among the smuggled papers. The wax bore Lucien's sigil, the same wolf and sun crest I used to wear proudly. I broke it open. All Omegas conscripted under the Purity Edict are to be freed. Henceforth, the hierarchy of scent shall not dictate service. I read it twice, 3 times. Lucien had ended the conscription. My chest tightened. Not with pride, not with forgiveness, but with something bitterly close to both. Damn you, you're trying to atone, I whispered, and for the first time in 7 years I couldn't tell if I wanted him to succeed or fail. The rebellion grew bolder. The empire grew restless. And somewhere in the middle I stayed invisible, writing letters, saving lives, burning bridges in secret. The Black Wolf had become a ghost story. And me? I was just a man who'd already lived one life too many. But as I sealed another coded message that night, I caught myself whispering to the darkness. Lucien, if you're still haunted by my ghost, then good, because I'm still out here haunting you back. Chapter 8, The Emperor's Hunt. Empires don't fall overnight. They crumble the way mountains do, grain by grain, crack by crack, until one day the world looks up and realizes the horizon has changed. I'd been watching Lucien's empire fracture for months now. Every report that crossed my desk read like a slow confession. Lost supply lines, mutinous generals, uprisings spreading from the northern provinces to the capital itself. The emperor was running out of time. And when powerful men grow desperate, they start hunting ghosts. It began with a letter, sealed with the imperial crest, delivered by a trembling courier who had no idea who he was handing it to the strategist known as the Black Wolf. If you truly exist, the empire requests your counsel. Our borders burn. Our people starve. If you wish to change this world, meet me halfway. Lucien. I stared at the parchment for a long time, tracing the curve of the handwriting I knew too well. It was neater now, colder. The script of an emperor. But the pressure of the strokes, that stubborn weight at the end of every line, hadn't changed. He still wrote like a man who couldn't let go. I almost laughed. The irony was too rich. The man who had once chained me for being an Omega was now begging my ghost for salvation. I didn't respond immediately. I let him wait. Weeks passed. His messengers came and went, leaving increasingly desperate notes. Some offered gold, others threats, others quiet pleas wrapped in pride. I answered only when I was certain he'd stopped expecting it. My reply was short. If the emperor seeks the wolf, he must first bleed humility. You want advice? Stop starving your own people to feed your nobles. I sent it through 3 intermediaries, none of whom knew who they served. 3 days later, a reply came. I've executed 5 nobles for corruption. The 6th was my cousin. How much more blood do you want, Wolf? I smirked when I read it. So you still have claws, Lucien. The letters continued. Always through channels, always encoded. He'd write of troop movements, failed negotiations, the pressure of a crumbling court. I'd write of strategy, logic, patience, words that cut sharper than any blade. But beneath the cold exchanges, something else began to thread through, something dangerously familiar. He stopped signing his letters as emperor. He started signing them simply, and sometimes, between lines of war and politics, there were questions that had nothing to do with strategy. Do you ever regret what you've done, Wolf? Do you believe people can change? And once, do you ever miss someone you never knew? I didn't answer that one. Months passed. His reforms spread faster than any army could march. He freed Omega conscripts, disbanded purity tribunals, ordered mixed ranks in the military. Every law he wrote tore a piece of the old empire apart, the same empire that had once broken me. And every time I read a decree bearing his name, I wondered, was this penance? Or evolution? Maybe both. Our correspondence had grown so intricate that even my couriers started whispering rumors. The emperor's strategist, a phantom who commands from the shadows. They said, none of them knew the truth, that the emperor's savior and the empire's ghost were the same man. Sometimes I thought about ending it, cutting all ties, disappearing again. But then I'd read one of his letters. Steady, searching, half proud and half broken. And I'd remember the night I died at the gate, his hand trembling on mine. And I'd think, maybe he deserves to suffer the uncertainty. Then came the message that changed everything. The emperor requests a meeting through a proxy if necessary. He wishes to speak, not as a ruler, but as a man. I stared at the words for a long time. A man. He didn't know he was asking to meet the corpse of one. 2 weeks later, the meeting took place in an abandoned monastery on the outskirts of the capital. I didn't go myself, of course. I sent a trusted intermediary, a beta smuggler named Taryn who'd been running my letters for years. He carried a recording device, enchanted to capture sound and sent traces. I wanted to hear him, just once. When Taryn returned that night, he looked pale. He's not like the others, he said quietly. He listens. He handed me the device. I activated it. Lucien's voice filled the room. Low, steady, familiar enough to make my throat ache. I don't know who you are, but I think I've known you for a long time. Every word you write feels familiar. It's as if you see through me. He said on the recording. There was a pause, a sharp inhale. I keep dreaming about someone. A man with eyes like winter and a scar along his jaw. I see him dying over and over, at a gate of fire. I don't know why. He continued softly. Silence followed. Only the sound of his breath, quiet, uneven. I turned off the device. For a long time I didn't move. He remembered. Not clearly, not consciously. But somewhere deep, the bond still burned. Faint but unbroken. I poured myself another drink and sat in the dark until dawn. I told myself it didn't matter, that the past was ash, and ghosts belonged to graves. But the next morning, when I wrote my next letter, my hand shook for the first time in years. A man is not defined by what he builds, but by what he chooses to destroy. You're doing well, Emperor. Don't stop now. I wrote. I hesitated, then added one last line before sealing the parchment. Some ghosts don't want revenge, only remembrance. I shouldn't have written that. It was too personal, too dangerous. But when the courier left and the room fell silent, I realized why I had done it. Because maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to know I was still out here. Watching, guiding, haunting. Chapter 9, Recognition. The Empire was faltering. The rebels were divided. I was the thread between them, the ghost both sides trusted but neither saw. So when the Emperor himself demanded to meet the Black Wolf face to face, refusing to negotiate otherwise, I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't courage that made me say yes. It was curiosity. After all, what kind of man does a ghost become when he starts believing in redemption? The hall chosen for the summit was neutral ground, a ruined citadel on the border, surrounded by ash plains and dead trees. Fitting, really. A meeting between a fallen man and the empire he'd once bled for deserved no living witness. I arrived first, masked, cloaked, every inch the phantom they imagined me to be. My mask was simple. Black steel, carved into a wolf's visage, hiding everything but my mouth. The voice I used wasn't my own. I roughened it, buried its tone under gravel. Still, I wondered if he'd know me by silence alone. Lucien entered without guards. That surprised me. He wore no crown, no armor. Just a long black coat, a sword at his hip, and exhaustion clinging to his shoulders like dust. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray at the temples, and his gaze God's that gaze, still sharp enough to cut through armor. When his eyes landed on me, the air shifted. "Black Wolf, so you do exist," he said, voice low but steady. I inclined my head slightly. Disappointed. His lips curved, not quite a smile. Relieved. We began with talk of borders, alliances, supplies, all the language of men pretending not to remember blood. He was calm, disciplined, but I could feel the tension beneath it, the edge of obsession. Every time I spoke, he listened too closely. Every pause, every tilt of my head, he tracked like a soldier studying an enemy commander. "You know, you sound familiar," he said finally, breaking a silence too long to be polite. I let out a soft laugh. "I've been told many men sound the same when they give orders." He frowned. "No, not the voice. The way you look at me." I leaned forward just enough for the light to catch the metal of my mask. "And how is that, Your Majesty? Like you've already judged me." "Maybe I have." He pushed to his feet, temper slipping through the cracks. "You speak as if you've lived my life, Wolf. Do you know what it is to carry a kingdom that hates you for trying to change it?" I stood too. "Do you know what it is to die for one?" That stopped him cold. For a heartbeat, neither of us breathed. His aura flared, raw, dominant, unguarded. Old instincts prickled under my skin, warning me to step back, to protect my scent. I'd hidden it for years, mastered my body to obey silence. But emotion is a traitor. And the traitor slipped. A faint pulse of scent, sharp, wild, unmistakably mine, filled the air between us. Lucien froze, his pupils dilated. That moment stretched into eternity. He inhaled once, sharply, then again, slower, disbelieving. "No, it can't be," he whispered, barely audible. I didn't move. He stepped closer, the controlled emperor stripped bare by instinct. "That scent. I dreamed it for years." His voice broke. "Kale?" My pulse thundered, but my face, the only part visible beneath the mask, twisted into a smirk. "You finally found me." His hand shot out, fingers brushing the edge of my mask. I caught his wrist midair. "Don't," I said quietly. His jaw clenched. "You're alive. Alive enough. You let me mourn you. For years." I tilted my head. "You made me die, remember?" The words hit him harder than any blade. For a long time he just stood there, staring like a man seeing both ghost and God. His hand trembled, and I hated that it made something inside me ache. "I tried to change everything. For you. For what I did to you," he said finally, voice cracking through the mask of power. I let out a dry laugh. "Then you've learned one thing, at least. Guilt is an excellent motivator. Don't do that." "Do what?" "Hide behind mockery. You always—" He stopped himself, eyes narrowing. "No, you still do." "Then maybe you never really knew me," I said, stepping back. He stepped closer again, slow, deliberate. "I wanted to know you." I held his gaze, even as old instinct clawed at my chest. "Ask me after you rebuild a world that doesn't need alphas to rule it." Lucien's expression softened, a flicker of something human beneath the crown. "Then stay. Help me do it." For the briefest second, I almost said yes. Almost. But then I remembered the chains, the cage, the scent of iron and fear. I turned away. "The wolf doesn't serve kings anymore." Behind me, his voice trembled. "Then what do you serve?" I paused at the door, glancing back over my shoulder. "Freedom. Even if I have to tear down every throne to find it," I said. When I left, the wind howled through the broken walls, echoing off stone and silence. I didn't look back. But I didn't have to, because I knew what he would do. He would chase. He always did. And this time I wasn't running to escape. I was running to see if he'd learned how to follow. Chapter 10: The Emperor's Undoing. I should have left that day. I should have vanished back into the wilderness and let history devour itself. But I didn't. Maybe because I wanted to see what kind of Emperor Lucian would become when stripped of the boy I once knew. The boy who believed power could excuse cruelty. Or maybe because some masochistic part of me wanted to watch him break. Either way, I lingered in the shadows of his reign. Unseen but always near. It started subtly. Letters addressed to the wolf, delivered through secret couriers. Offers wrapped in careful language. Amnesty, alliance, trust. Then one day, a letter came sealed in gold, the handwriting unmistakable. Kale, I won't chase your ghost anymore. Come to the capital. I want to see you, as you are. No titles, no commands, just that name. My name. I burned the letter, but the words branded deeper than fire. A week later, I stood in his throne room. It wasn't like before. All marble, cold banners, and hollow pride. The hall was stripped bare, guards dismissed, the air heavy with rain. Lucian sat on the steps of the dais, crown discarded beside him. When he looked up, I saw what obsession did to him. Sleepless eyes, clenched jaw, and a hunger that had nothing to do with desire. He rose slowly. You came. I wanted to see what a king looks like when he begs, I said. He almost smiled. Then watch closely. He walked down the steps until we stood an arm's length apart. I can give you back everything, your command, your title, your honor. You could lead armies again under no man's leash, he said. I met his gaze. There it is, the alpha in you, always trading chains for favors. His voice sharpened. I'm offering peace, not power. No, you're offering ownership in prettier wrapping. Lucian's jaw flexed. And what do you want, Kale? You've spent years tearing down everything I built. Yet here you are, standing in my hall. I stepped closer, the edge of my cloak brushing his boots. You think I stayed because of you? Didn't you? I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. You don't get to own freedom twice, Lucian. The silence after that cut sharper than steel. He didn't reply, not at first. He just stared at me, something dark flickering in his eyes. Then, instead of anger, he exhaled and said, almost softly, Then I'll prove you wrong. How? By building a world where no one needs to hide what you had to. I frowned. You think a few reforms can wash the blood off your hands? He looked up, eyes clear for the first time. No, but it's a start. And he did. For months, I watched from afar as the empire began to shift. The Omega Conscription Act, abolished. The hierarchy courts dissolved. Mixed ranks in the army mandatory. Every decree was a blade turned against his own system, every law a piece of the old order burning. The nobles called him mad. The clergy called him heretic. The generals whispered rebellion. Lucian just kept signing papers with a calm that terrified everyone who knew what it cost him. I received no more letters, no demands, only results. And for the first time, I started to believe he might not be doing it for the throne, but for the ghost who once spat blood at his boots and told him what freedom really meant. Still, guilt makes men reckless. It was dusk when I found him again. Not in the palace, but on the training grounds behind it, sword in hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat darkening his shirt. He looked up when I approached. You shouldn't sneak up on people who have tried to kill you. Only once, I said. He smirked. Twice. If you count the time you made me fall in love with you. I almost laughed. Almost. And how's that working out for you? He swung the sword, slicing through empty air. Poorly. We stood there for a long time, the sun bleeding out behind the walls. You're undoing everything you once swore to protect, I said quietly. He rested the blade against the ground, eyes on the horizon. Maybe that's the only way I can make peace with the man I was. You think this absolves you? No, but it might mean you'll stop hating me long enough to see what I'm trying to build. I stepped closer until his scent, steady, earthy, painfully familiar, filled my lungs. Careful, Lucian. You're starting to sound human. He turned to face me. And you're starting to sound like you still care. My hand tightened at my side. Care doesn't mean forgiveness. It's a beginning. That night, I left before dawn. Couldn't stand the way he looked at me. Not like an emperor, but like a man waiting for judgment. But as I crossed the palace walls, I saw the city changing beneath me. Omegas walking without collars. Soldiers laughing side by side without fear. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Lucian was dismantling his own crown piece by piece, all to prove a promise I'd never asked him to make. The thought should have comforted me. Instead, it hollowed me out, because I knew the truth. Men like him don't stop until they've destroyed themselves trying to rebuild the world. And men like me, we don't stop watching them fall. Days later, a new law spread across the empire. From this day forward, no citizen of any designation shall be bound by scent, class, or birthright. Freedom is not granted, it is inherent. Lucian's name beneath it, the emperor's undoing, written in ink and defiance. When I read the decree, I felt something break open in my chest. Not anger, not forgiveness, just the faintest tremor of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. He didn't know it yet, but with every chain he shattered, he was unbinding both of us. And maybe that was his greatest act. Not ruling, not changing laws, but proving that even kings could learn to kneel before the truth. Chapter 11, The Turning War. The war came not like thunder, but like rot. Whispers first, then smoke. Then the north burned, and the world remembered that peace is just the pause between storms. The northern kingdoms, long silent under imperial shadow, marched as one. Tens of thousands of soldiers crossing the Frostlands with a single goal: to erase the empire and all who bore its mark. I had seen invasions before, but this one was different. It wasn't conquest, it was vengeance. And vengeance is harder to stop than any army. Lucian sent for me, again. By then, the borders had already fallen, and the empire's soldiers were bleeding into rebel lines. Both sides were losing ground, arguing over whose flag deserved to die first. When I arrived at the War Council, it felt like stepping into a battlefield before the fighting began. Generals barked. Rebels sneered. Papers scattered like the feathers of slaughtered doves. Lucian sat at the center of it all. Tired, regal, holding chaos together by sheer will. When he saw me, the noise in the room dimmed. "Everyone out," he said. They obeyed, though not without looks that could have carved stone. When the doors shut, he exhaled like a man unclenching a wound. "You took your time. I was deciding whether the empire deserved saving," I said. And I looked at him, still undecided. He smiled, faint, bitter. "Then help me decide. The North has broken through 3 provinces. They're marching for the capital. We can't stop them without uniting both armies. Rebels and Imperials fighting side by side? You're asking wolves to march with the hounds who caged them." I let out a low laugh. "I'm asking you to make them." His eyes met mine, steady, burning. "You're the only one they'll follow." There was truth in his words, and that's what made it unbearable. The rebels trusted me. The Black Wolf. The ghost who defied thrones. The soldiers still remembered my name whispered on the front lines years ago, before my death. I was the bridge between 2 worlds that hated each other, and both would burn without it. Still, I asked, "And what do I get, Lucian?" "For saving your empire again." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "My crown, if that's what it takes." I arched a brow. "That's not what I want." "Then what?" I smiled thinly. "No orders. No chains. If I lead, you fight beneath me. You do not command me." The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Then he nodded once. "Agreed." We rode north at dawn. The rebel camps stretched across the valley. Banners of different colors, smells of oil and smoke, the sound of distrust thick in the air. When I stepped into their midst, the noise died. Someone whispered, "The wolf." I walked through them, hood down, mask gone. I was done hiding. "Listen well, the North isn't coming for emperors or rebels. They're coming to wipe out all of us." They don't care what flag you wear, only that you bleed red. I said, voice steady and loud. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I turned toward the Imperials standing at the edge of the camp. Stiff, wary. You fought me once, you called me traitor. Maybe I was. But today, I'm your only chance to live, I said. Then I pointed toward the hills, where distant drums rolled like thunder. Follow me, and I'll lead you to victory. Stay divided, and you'll die proud and pointless. It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. Lucian watched from the sidelines, saying nothing. But when the crowd roared their assent, rebels and soldiers shouting, "Wolf! Wolf!" in unison, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Pride, maybe awe, maybe fear. That night, as we planned the defense, he stood beside me in the candlelight, his armor stripped down, his hand tracing the battle map. You haven't changed, still commanding storms, he said softly. And you're still standing too close to the lightning, I replied. He smirked. Someone has to keep you from burning yourself out. I looked at him then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, I saw not an emperor, not a symbol, but the man who had carried me from the battlefield years ago, hands trembling, eyes full of fire and regret. And I thought, if we survive this, maybe I'll finally let him earn his peace. The first attack came at dawn 2 days later. Snow fell thick and red, muffling screams. The northern armies poured over the ridge like a tide of steel. I commanded from the front, signals flashing, formations splitting and reforming like living blades. Lucian fought where he said he would. Beneath me, his banner lowered, his sword striking alongside common soldiers. Every time I saw him in the chaos, hair matted, armor stained, eyes blazing, something in me tightened. Not pride, not love, something older, something unspoken. We fought like one body split in two, he with the fire, I with the blade. Hours passed. Bodies fell. The field became mud and blood and smoke. When at last the sun broke through, the northern army was in retreat, shattered by the unity they swore we couldn't forge. The cheers were faint, exhausted, but real. Lucian approached me through the wreckage, limping slightly. You did it, he said, voice hoarse. I looked at him. We did. He smiled, small, tired, sincere. Then what happens now? I turned toward the horizon, where the ashes of both banners burned side by side. Now we see if peace can stand where pride once ruled. He nodded slowly. And if it can't? I met his gaze. Then we'll build something better from what's left. That night, as the campfire burned low and silence finally fell, Lucian sat beside me. Not as emperor, not as alpha, but as man. He said nothing. Neither did I. But for the first time in 2 lifetimes, the silence between us didn't feel like war. Felt like truce. Chapter 12, The Final Battle. War has a sound. It's not shouting or steel. It's the silence just before the first scream. That silence was thick over the valley as dawn broke, pale and bloodless. The snow had stopped falling, and for a moment the world seemed too still, too fragile. We'd built the plan perfectly. Every movement calculated, every soldier placed. The Empire and the rebels, one army under one command. My command. If this worked, the war would end. If it didn't, so would we. Lucian found me before the battle began. He didn't wear his crown, hadn't in months. His armor was scarred, his cloak torn, his eyes steady. You're pale, he said, studying me as if he could see through the steel and bone. Occupational hazard, I replied. You haven't slept in 2 days. Neither have you. He huffed a quiet laugh, the kind that held no joy. You always did have to win the last word. Someone has to remind the Emperor he's mortal. He looked at me for a long time. Then, voice low, he said, just don't die proving it. I almost smiled. No promises. When the horn sounded, the world came apart. Fire rained from the cliffs. The northern army surged forward like a black tide. I moved through the chaos like instinct, shouting orders, signaling flanks, adjusting formations as though the entire war was an extension of my pulse. Every step was calculation. Every choice a gamble. Lucian fought at the front, blade in hand, armor gleaming with ash. The sight of him was a contradiction. An emperor with blood on his face, fighting for a world that would outgrow him. And somehow I loved him for that. By midday, the field was unrecognizable. Mud, smoke, bodies. The sky cracked open with flame. But the enemy line began to falter. My traps triggered in perfect sequence. A chain of explosions tearing through their ranks. Lucien's forces advanced, our banners rising side by side, black and gold, rebel and imperial. For the first time, I believed it might be enough. Then came the arrow. I didn't see it, just the sudden shock in my chest, the burn spreading through muscle and bone. I stumbled, caught myself, but the blood came fast, warm against the cold air. My knees hit the ground. The world dimmed at the edges. Someone shouted my name, distant, desperate. Lucien. He was beside me a heartbeat later, hands pressing against the wound, voice breaking. Stay with me, Kill. Do you hear me? You still give too many orders. Shut up. You don't get to leave me again. His tone cracked between command and plea. The battlefield raged around us, but his voice drowned it all out. Do you know what it's been like, living with your ghost? I rebuilt the world, but I never rebuilt myself. He whispered. I blinked, vision fading. You finally sound like a man, not a king. His grip tightened. Then live long enough to tell me what that means. I remember the warmth of his hands, the tremor in his breath, the way he tore off his cloak and pressed it against my chest like he could will the blood back into me. Then the shouting shifted, our soldiers pushing the enemy back, victory erupting like thunder. We'd done it. The war was over, and I was dying on the ground that peace would grow from. Figures moved around us. Healers, soldiers, the sound of triumph turning into panic. But Lucien refused to let anyone touch me. Back away, I'll take him myself. He barked, voice like command and prayer. He lifted me into his arms. For a moment, I forgot the pain. Forgot everything except the way his heart pounded against mine. When I woke again, it was to the scent of firewood and linen. The world swam into focus. A tent, soft light, the quiet murmur of soldiers outside. Lucien sat beside me, armor gone, eyes rimmed red. You should be dead, he said. I've been told I'm bad at dying. He laughed softly, a sound that cracked and mended at once. The healers said you won't fight again. I never wanted to. His gaze lingered on me, unreadable. You saved us all. I saved myself from becoming someone who only knew how to kill, I said. He leaned forward, hand brushing the back of mine. Careful, tentative. Then let me save you now. The touch was hesitant, reverent. He pressed his forehead against mine, eyes closed, breath trembling. I spent half my life trying to control you, the other half trying to atone for it. But now, I just want to understand you, he whispered. I felt the words settle deep, heavy, honest. When I spoke, my voice was barely there. You finally learned what an alpha is supposed to be. He smiled, small, sad, full of something real. And what's that? Someone who protects without possessing. Our lips met, not fire this time, not fury, just quiet, desperate warmth. There was no dominance, no command, only two people who had survived too much to pretend anymore. He kissed me like prayer, and I let him because this time it wasn't about ownership. It was about release. The world outside still burned, but inside that tent, time stopped. The scent of blood faded, replaced by the faint hum of devotion. His hand found mine. My heart steadied, and for the first time in 2 lives, I didn't feel like a weapon. I felt human. Chapter 14, The Child of Two Worlds. The war ended, but silence can be its own kind of battlefield. Months passed since the final clash, and the Empire, our fractured, bleeding empire, had begun to stitch itself back together. The scent of smoke had faded from the streets, replaced by the sharp tang of ink and parchment. Laws were being rewritten. Old seals burned. Lucien called it rebuilding. I called it survival. I spent my mornings in the gardens outside the palace, They'd once been reserved for nobles, but now soldiers, merchants, and even the lowest omegas could walk among the roses. A small, ridiculous thing, but to them it meant everything. Sometimes they'd recognize me. "General Kale," they'd whisper, bowing too deeply. "The Wolf General." I never corrected them. They didn't need to know how much that name still hurt. One morning I felt it, pull deep in my body. A change. At first I thought it was exhaustion, the kind that never leaves after years of battle. But the healer's eyes told me otherwise. "You're carrying life," she said softly, as if afraid the word might break me. I laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "Life? In this ruined body?" Her smile didn't falter. "Perhaps the world thought you'd earned another chance." I didn't know how to respond. For once, words failed me. I told Lucien that night. He stared for a long moment, not breathing, not speaking. His hands trembled before he finally reached for me. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Positive. Don't look at me like that. I'm not made of glass." His eyes softened. "You're made of iron and fire. But even iron bends under enough weight. I've carried worse." He smiled then, small, tired, full of something human. "Then we'll carry this together." Weeks passed. News spread faster than wildfire. The Wolf General is pregnant. The Emperor's Omega walks the palace openly. An heir born of war and rebellion. The nobles were furious. The council meetings became battlegrounds of their own. "You defy tradition, and Omega cannot be the Emperor's equal." One of them hissed at Lucien. Lucien stood then, calm, composed, terrifying in his certainty. "Then perhaps it's time we stopped calling anyone less than equal." Their protests filled the chamber. He turned to me, not caring who watched. He took my hand. Publicly. "Kale isn't my consort, he's my partner. My equal. The one who taught me what strength truly is," he said. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through steel. That night, I found him in his study, the candlelight painting tired shadows across his face. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. He looked up. "Do what?" "Challenge half your court just to make a statement." "It wasn't a statement, it was truth. You spent half your life pretending to be something else. I won't let this empire do that to you again," he said. I crossed the room, leaned against the desk, and met his gaze. "You realize this means the nobles will come for you next." He smirked. "Let them. I've survived worse. You, for instance." I couldn't help it. I laughed. It felt strange, real, like something unclenched in my chest for the first time in years. When the revolt came, it was small and desperate, like a dying beast refusing to accept its end. They stormed the palace gates with old banners and older hate. I was there, armor half-fastened, blade steady. Lucien stood beside me. The people came too, not to fight us, but to stand between us and the nobles. Farmers, soldiers, Omegas with children on their backs. One of the rebels shouted, "You're protecting an abomination." A farmer's voice rose in answer, "He's the reason my sons came home alive." And just like that, the rebellion died, not in blood, but in shame. Afterward, Lucien found me standing on the balcony, watching the smoke drift into the night. "You did it, they follow you now, not me," he said quietly. "They follow hope. For once, it's not the same thing as power," I replied. He slipped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Does it frighten you? What comes next?" I looked down at the city, the lights, the laughter, the slow heartbeat of something reborn. "It terrifies me, but maybe that's how I know it's real," I said. He kissed my temple. "You've always been the braver one." "No, just the more stubborn," I whispered. Months later, when the first snow fell again, I sat in the courtyard with a hand over my growing belly. The wind carried the faint scent of iron and rain. Familiar, comforting. Lucien knelt beside me, his hand covering mine. "You know, the child will grow up never knowing what it means to bow," he murmured. I smiled faintly. "Then maybe they'll be the first to stand without fighting." He looked at me, something unspoken in his eyes. You've changed everything. I turned to him, voice low but steady. No, we did. Together. The world beyond the palace walls was still fragile, still learning how to breathe again. But for the first time in 2 lives, I didn't feel like I was fighting it. The wind rustled the banners above us, black and gold stitched together. 2 colors, 2 worlds, 1 future, and beneath it all, a heartbeat that wasn't just mine anymore. Chapter 15, The Undoing. Peace has a strange weight. It doesn't roar like war. It hums, low and constant, like a heartbeat you forget to notice until it stops. Years have passed since the last sword was raised. The empire, once drenched in pride and blood, now moves like something learning to breathe again. Lucien calls it rebirth. I call it the quiet after the storm. Our son was born in spring, an alpha like his father. When I first held him, he didn't cry, just stared at me with those sharp, unblinking eyes. I thought, so this is what comes after everything we've destroyed. Lucien named him Rain, meaning renewal in the old tongue. Sometimes, when I look at him, I see flashes of both our lives. My stubbornness, Lucien's discipline, that same infuriating spark of defiance that neither of us could ever quite smother. I never expected to raise a child. I spent too many years leading soldiers, too many nights bleeding under stars, to imagine something so simple as a boy laughing in the sunlight. But life has a cruel sense of irony. The wild wolf became a father. Lucien abdicated 2 years later. He announced it without ceremony. No crown, no council, just a speech from the palace balcony. I no longer believe in rule by blood. If this empire is to last, it must belong to those who build it, not those who inherit it, he said. The crowd was silent for a long time. Then they began to cheer, not for an emperor, but for a man finally choosing freedom. Afterward, when he came home, I asked him, "Do you regret it?" He smiled faintly. Power was never the problem. Pride was. You gave away everything people spend lifetimes killing for. I didn't give it away, I outgrew it, he said. And for once, I believed him. We moved from the palace soon after, a small house by the sea, far from the marble walls and politics. Lucien learned how to fish poorly. Rain learned how to run faster than both of us. I learned how to sleep without expecting to wake to the sound of marching boots. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was finally ours. Sometimes at dusk I walked to the cliffs, the same cliffs where I died once or thought I had. The wind there still smells like iron and salt. Below, the sea breaks endlessly against the rocks, erasing every trace of the blood that was once spilled here. I come to remember, not to mourn, but to make sure I never forget who I was, who I fought to become. That day, Lucien joined me. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, eyes on the horizon, the wind pulling his hair loose from the tie. After a while, he said, "Do you still think about it? The first life. Every day, but it doesn't hurt anymore." I answered. He nodded. "Good. I used to dream about it. The battlefield, your body in my arms, the scent of blood and smoke. I thought it was my punishment, to remember the moment I lost you." I turned to him. "And now?" He looked at me, eyes clear. "Now I realize I never lost you. You were never my undoing, Kale. You were my beginning." The words hit deeper than I expected. Not because they were poetic, but because they were true. Rain's laughter drifted from the house, small and bright against the wind. I smiled. "Then I suppose we finally learned how to live without chains." Lucien took my hand, his grip steady, warm. "You taught me that. The world doesn't need to be tamed, Kale. It just needs to learn how to run free." I looked out over the ocean, the waves crashing endlessly, the same rhythm as a heartbeat, as history, as the echo of everything we survived. The wild wolf, he was never tamed. I murmured, half to myself, half to the wind. Lucien turned to me, eyes soft. "No, he taught the world how to run free." And for the first time in all my lives, I believed it. The scars, the wars, the scent of smoke and sorrow, all of it had led here, not to thrones or legends, but to peace, to love that didn't cage. To a child who would grow in a world where alphas no longer ruled by birthright. I breathed in the salt air, the wind curling through my hair like memory. Maybe that's what freedom really is, not the absence of chains, but the choice to never wear them again.